It was a chilly autumn morning, and the sun had barely risen over New York City. People were rushing to catch their flights, dragging suitcases behind them, sipping coffee from paper cups, and trying not to miss their boarding calls. Among these travelers was a woman in her early 30s. She wasn't dressed like your typical business tycoon, no power suits or flashy jewelry. Instead, she wore a pair of fitted jeans, a simple blazer, and sneakers. Her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and she carried just a tote bag and a laptop case. This woman happened to be one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country. She'd built her empire from scratch, starting with nothing but a dream and an unrelenting work ethic. Recently, she'd made headlines when she bought Skywings Airways, a mid-sized airline struggling to stay competitive. But here's the twist. She hadn't told anyone yet. Not the employees, not the media, and certainly not the passengers. For now, she wanted to fly under the radar, literally and figuratively. She stepped onto the plane, clutching her boarding pass tightly. The cabin smelled faintly of cleaning products mixed with stale air, a familiar scent that reminded her of countless trips she'd taken over the years. As she found her seat near the window, she couldn't help but notice how cramped everything felt. Sure, she could afford first class, but today she decided to sit in economy. After all, if she was going to run an airline, she needed to understand what it was like for the average passenger. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisles, checking tickets and stowing luggage. One of them caught her eye, a tall, sharp-featured woman who seemed perpetually annoyed. This flight attendant, whose name tag read Rachel, had a brisk way of speaking that didn't exactly scream warmth. Still, the entrepreneur shrugged it off. Everyone has bad days, right? As the plane prepared for takeoff, things started getting chaotic. Two passengers near her row began arguing loudly about seat assignments. Apparently, one of them had taken the other's preferred spot by the window. Voices grew louder, hands gestured wildly, and soon enough, half the cabin was craning their necks to see what was happening. It was the kind of scene you'd expect on a reality TV show rather than a routine commercial flight. Rachel stormed over, clipboard in hand, ready to put an end to the drama. "Excuse me," she barked, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Can we please keep it down? We're trying to get this plane off the ground." Her words did little to calm the situation. If anything, they added fuel to the fire. The arguing passengers turned their frustration toward Rachel, accusing her of being rude and unsympathetic. Other travelers chimed in with opinions of their own, some siding with the passengers, others defending Rachel. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Amidst the chaos, the entrepreneur stayed quiet, watching the spectacle unfold. She didn't want to get involved. It wasn't her problem. But as Rachel tried to regain control, something strange happened. The flight attendant glanced in her direction and froze. Maybe it was the slight smirk playing on the entrepreneur's lips, or maybe it was the way she leaned back in her seat, seemingly unfazed by the commotion. Whatever it was, Rachel zeroed in on her. "Is there something funny?" Rachel snapped, glaring at her. The entrepreneur blinked, surprised to suddenly be dragged into the mess. "No, I'm just sitting here," she replied calmly, holding up her hands in surrender. "Well, stop smirking like you're better than everyone else," Rachel shot back, her tone dripping with disdain. A murmur rippled through the nearby rows. Passengers exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or cringe. The entrepreneur opened her mouth to explain herself but thought better of it. Arguing wouldn't solve anything, and besides, she didn't owe this stranger an explanation. But Rachel wasn't done, whether it was stress, exhaustion, or plain old anger boiling over. She lost her cool completely. Before anyone could react, she reached out and slapped the entrepreneur across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Time seemed to freeze. Every single person on board stared in stunned silence, mouths hanging open. The entrepreneur pressed a hand to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, nobody said a word. Then, breaking the silence, she looked Rachel straight in the eye and delivered a chilling line. "You have no idea who I am," Rachel scoffed, rolling her eyes as if dismissing the comment entirely. "Whatever," she muttered, turning on her heel and marching away to deal with the still unresolved seating dispute. What neither Rachel nor anyone else on that plane realized was that those 7 words carried far more weight than they appeared. Because the woman sitting there nursing a stinging cheek wasn't just another disgruntled passenger. She was the new owner of Skywings Airways, and Rachel's boss. Little did Rachel know, her life was about to change forever. This version expands the story naturally while keeping it engaging and relatable. Let me know if you'd like me to continue expanding the next parts. The slap echoed through the cabin like a thunderclap, leaving everyone frozen in place. For a moment it felt as though time itself had stopped. The entrepreneur sat there, her hand instinctively moving to her cheek where Rachel's palm had left its mark. Her face was a mix of shock and disbelief, but beneath that, something else simmered: anger. Not the explosive kind, but the quiet, calculated fury that comes when someone crosses a line they didn't even realize existed. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the gravity of what she'd just done. She stood there for a split second, her chest heaving as if she were still caught up in the heat of the argument. Then, with a dismissive shake of her head, she turned away, muttering under her breath about entitled passengers who thought they were above the rules. To her, this was just another inconvenience on a long list of frustrations that came with working in customer service. But deep down, even she knew she'd gone too far. The passengers around them were glued to their seats, unsure of how to react. Some stared at the entrepreneur, waiting to see if she would retaliate. Others glared at Rachel, clearly disapproving of her actions. A few people pulled out their phones, recording snippets of the scene unfolding before them. Social media thrives on drama, after all, and this was shaping up to be quite the spectacle. The entrepreneur took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to steady herself. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, watching, waiting. Part of her wanted to lash out, to stand up and confront Rachel right then and there. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned back in her seat, her expression unreadable. The sting on her cheek was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside her mind. She replayed those words in her head. "You have no idea who I am." It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. As the plane finally taxied down the runway and lifted into the sky, the atmosphere remained tense. Passengers whispered among themselves, speculating about what had just happened. Was the woman some kind of celebrity? A politician? Or maybe just someone with a short temper who got what was coming to her? No one knew for sure, but everyone had an opinion. And while most sympathized with the entrepreneur, a small handful defended Rachel, claiming the passenger must have provoked her somehow. After all, flight attendants deal with difficult people every day. It's not easy work. Meanwhile, Rachel tried to push the incident to the back of her mind. She busied herself with routine tasks, handing out snacks and drinks, pretending everything was normal. But it wasn't. Every time she passed the entrepreneur's row, she avoided making eye contact, her steps quickening slightly, as if afraid the woman might say something. The tension between them was palpable, like an invisible thread pulling tighter with each passing minute. For the entrepreneur, the rest of the flight felt endless. She couldn't focus on anything, not the book she'd brought along, not the movie playing on the screen in front of her. Her thoughts kept circling back to the slap, replaying the moment over and over again. Who did Rachel think she was? What gave her the right to treat someone like that? The injustice of it gnawed at her, fueling her determination to take action. Once they landed. Finally, after what felt like hours, the plane touched down in Los Angeles. As soon as the seatbelt sign switched off, passengers began gathering their belongings and filing toward the exit. The entrepreneur stayed seated for a moment longer, collecting herself. When she finally stood up, she moved with purpose, her earlier calm replaced by a steely resolve. She stepped off the plane without looking back, her tote bag slung over, her shoulder and her jaw set firmly. Once outside the airport terminal, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "I need you to look into something," she said, her voice low but commanding. "It's urgent." On the other end of the line, her legal team listened intently as she explained what had happened. By the time she hung up, wheels were already in motion. An internal investigation would be launched into Skywings Airways staff conduct, starting with Rachel. There would be consequences, not because the entrepreneur sought revenge, but because accountability mattered. Especially when you're running a business built on trust. Back on the plane, Rachel clocked out of her shift completely unaware of the storm heading her way. She grabbed her bag from the crew locker and headed home, eager to put the chaotic day behind her. As she scrolled through social media during her commute, however, her blood ran cold. Video clips of the slap were everywhere, accompanied by hashtags like Dashiar, Skywing Scandal, and Darn Unprofessional Flight Crew. Comments poured in from strangers, some condemning her actions, others defending her. But one comment in particular caught her. That passenger is the CEO of the airline. Hope Rachel enjoys unemployment. Rachel's heart sank. At first, she thought it was just internet speculation. People always jumped to conclusions online. But the more she read, the harder it became to deny the truth. The woman she'd slapped wasn't just any passenger. She was the new owner of Skywings Airways, and Rachel had just assaulted her. Panic set in as reality hit her like a freight train. This wasn't just a bad day at work anymore. This was her career, and possibly her life, spiraling out of control. Desperate, she reached out to human resources, hoping to explain her side of the story. Maybe she could spin it as self-defense or claim she was overwhelmed by unruly passengers. Anything to save her job. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't matter. She'd crossed a line, and now she'd have to face the consequences. By the next morning, the story had exploded. News outlets picked it up, turning it into a national headline. Talk shows debated whether racism played a role in Rachel's behavior, given the entrepreneur's race. People shared memes poking fun at Rachel's expense, while others expressed outrage at the lack of professionalism displayed by Skywings Airways staff. The airline's reputation was taking a nosedive, and the entrepreneur found herself at the center of it all. Despite the chaos swirling around her, she remained composed. She knew this moment was bigger than just her personal experience. It was an opportunity to send a message, to hold people accountable and create real change within the industry. So instead of lashing out publicly or seeking revenge, she chose a different path. She called a press conference ready to address the world and explain exactly what she planned to do next. And as cameras rolled and reporters fired questions, she stood tall, her voice steady and clear. "This isn't about me," she said, looking directly into the lens. "It's about ensuring that every employee feels safe and respected in their workplace, and that every passenger knows they'll be treated with dignity when they fly with us." Her words resonated deeply, earning praise from both critics and supporters alike. But behind closed doors, the entrepreneur allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. Sitting alone in her office, she touched her cheek again, remembering the sharp sting of Rachel's slap. It wasn't just physical pain she felt. It was a reminder of how quickly respect can vanish when power dynamics are misused. And as she stared out the window at the city skyline, she vowed to make sure no one else ever had to feel that way again. The press conference was a whirlwind. Cameras flashed nonstop, reporters shouted questions from every direction, and social media buzzed with live updates. The entrepreneur stood at the podium, calm but firm, as she addressed the world. Her words were measured, her tone steady, but there was an undeniable edge of authority in her voice. She didn't mince words. She made it clear that what happened on that flight wasn't just an isolated incident. It was symptomatic of deeper issues within Skywings Airways, problems she intended to fix. "This isn't about revenge," she said, leaning slightly forward into the microphone. "It's not even about me personally. What happened to me could have happened to anyone, a passenger, a colleague, or even one of your loved ones. That's unacceptable. If you step onto one of my planes, I want you to feel safe, respected, valued, not humiliated." Her statement struck a chord. People nodded along, some scribbling notes while others recorded her words verbatim. The audience included passengers who'd been on the same flight, industry experts, and curious onlookers tuning in online. For many, this wasn't just about holding one person accountable. It was about addressing systemic failures, and the entrepreneur wasn't shying away from that responsibility. She announced sweeping changes, Mandatory sensitivity training for all staff, stricter policies around workplace conduct, and an anonymous hotline where employees could report misconduct without fear of retaliation. But behind the polished exterior, she was grappling with emotions she hadn't fully processed yet. After the press conference ended and the cameras stopped rolling, she retreated to her office. Sitting alone, she replayed the events of the flight over and over again in her mind. The slap itself had stung, sure, but it was the dismissal that lingered. The way Rachel had looked at her like she was nothing, like she was invisible. That feeling of being reduced to insignificance gnawed at her, reminding her of moments in her own life when people underestimated her because of her gender, her race, or her background. She shook her head, trying to push those thoughts aside. Now wasn't the time to dwell on the past. She had work to do. The investigation into Rachel's actions and the broader culture at Skywings Airways was already underway. Lawyers, HR representatives, and consultants were combing through records, interviewing employees, and reviewing footage from the flight. It was thorough, meticulous, and unrelenting. No stone would be left unturned. Meanwhile, Rachel's world was falling apart. By the time she woke up the morning after the flight, the internet had turned her into a villain. Memes mocked. Her articles dissected her behavior, and strangers flooded her social media accounts with hateful comments. Some called her a bully. Others labeled her a disgrace to the aviation industry. Even her friends and family struggled to defend her. How could they? The video evidence was damning, and her excuses sounded hollow even to her own ears. Desperate to salvage her career, Rachel reached out to her union representative. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she pleaded during their phone call. "I was stressed, okay? You know how it is when you're dealing with difficult passengers all day. I lost my temper, but I never thought—" Her voice trailed off, choking on the weight of her own mistakes. Her union rep listened patiently, offering sympathy but little hope. "Look, I get it. We've all been there. You're under pressure, things escalate, and you react without thinking. But this is bad, Rachel. Really bad. Assaulting a passenger is grounds for termination, especially when that passenger happens to be your boss. There's no coming back from this." Rachel felt sick to her stomach. She knew he was right, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way she couldn't ignore. She spent hours pacing her apartment, replaying the incident in her mind. Had she really slapped someone just because they smirked? Was she really that petty, that insecure? She hated herself for it, but denial was no longer an option. She'd messed up, and now she had to face the consequences. As news of Rachel's firing spread, public opinion remained divided. Some people celebrated the decision, calling it long overdue. Others argued that termination was too harsh, suggesting counseling or retraining instead. A few voices even defended Rachel entirely, claiming she was simply doing her job and shouldn't be punished for standing her ground. The debate raged on, with hashtags trending and opinion pieces flooding newspapers. Amidst the chaos, the entrepreneur found herself reflecting on forgiveness. She wasn't naive. She knew accountability mattered and Rachel's actions couldn't go unpunished. But she also believed in second chances. Everyone makes mistakes, after all. The key was learning from them and growing as a person. Still, forgiving Rachel wouldn't erase the harm she'd caused. Trust takes years to build and seconds to break, and the entrepreneur understood that better than most. Days turned into weeks, and the initial frenzy began to die down. Skywings Airways implemented the reforms the entrepreneur had promised, earning cautious praise from customers and employees alike. Passengers reported feeling more respected during flights, and staff morale slowly improved. It wasn't perfect. Change never happens overnight, but progress was undeniable. For Rachel, however, life became a struggle. Finding another job in the aviation industry proved nearly impossible. Every application she submitted was met with silence or outright rejection. Potential employers either recognized her name or saw the red flags in her references. Without steady income, bills piled up, and the stress took a toll on her mental health. Nights were sleepless, filled with regret and self-loathing. Days blurred together as she wrestled with shame and uncertainty about her future. One evening, sitting alone in her dimly lit kitchen, Rachel finally broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at a blank piece of paper. She didn't know where else to turn. With trembling hands, she began writing a letter, an apology. Not because she expected leniency or redemption, but because she needed to say the words, to acknowledge the pain she'd caused and take responsibility for her actions. "Dear ma'am," she wrote, her handwriting shaky but sincere, "I don't expect you to forgive me, and I understand if you never want to speak to me again. But I need you to know how sorry I am. What I did was wrong, and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. I hope someday I can prove to you, and to myself, that I'm capable of change." When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and mailed it to the corporate headquarters of Skywings Airways. She didn't include a return address, unsure if she wanted a response. For now, she just needed to let go of the burden weighing her down. Weeks passed before the entrepreneur received the letter. When she opened it, she read every word carefully, her expression unreadable. Part of her wanted to dismiss it outright, to write Rachel off as beyond redemption. But another part of her remembered what it felt like to make a mistake, to feel trapped by your own choices. She knew what it was like to hit rock bottom and claw your way back up. After much deliberation, she decided to meet Rachel, not as an employer or a victim, but as a human being. She arranged the meeting privately, away from prying eyes and judgmental opinions. When Rachel arrived, nervous and visibly shaken, the entrepreneur greeted her with a quiet nod. They sat across from each other in a small cafe, the air thick with tension. "I read your letter," the entrepreneur said eventually, breaking the silence. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." Rachel nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I meant every word," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." They talked for hours, sharing stories, fears, and hopes. By the end of their conversation, the entrepreneur extended an olive branch, not a job offer at Skywings, but a recommendation to a mentorship program designed to help individuals rebuild their careers. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a bow, but it was a start. As Rachel walked away from the cafe, she felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. Mistakes may define us, but they don't have to destroy us. Redemption isn't easy, but it's possible, if we're willing to fight for it. The meeting at the cafe marked a turning point, not just for Rachel but for the entrepreneur as well. For Rachel, it was a chance to confront her mistakes head-on and begin the long, difficult journey toward redemption. For the entrepreneur, it was an opportunity to practice what she preached, accountability paired with compassion. Both women walked away from that conversation, changed in ways they hadn't anticipated. Over the following weeks, Rachel threw herself into the mentorship program recommended by the entrepreneur. The program wasn't glamorous or easy. It required hard work, vulnerability, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths about herself. At first, Rachel struggled. She had spent years building walls around her emotions, convincing herself that toughness was the only way to survive in a high-pressure job like hers. But now, those walls felt more like cages, trapping her in patterns of behavior she desperately wanted to break. Her mentor, a seasoned professional with decades of experience in conflict resolution and leadership training, pushed Rachel to dig deep. "You can't just apologize and move on," he told her during one of their sessions. "Real change comes from understanding why you reacted the way you did, and then learning how to respond differently next time." Rachel nodded, though the words stung. Understanding herself felt like climbing a mountain without a map. Still, she kept going. She journaled about her feelings, attended workshops on emotional intelligence, and practiced active listening techniques in everyday conversations. Slowly but surely, she started to see glimpses of progress, small victories, like staying calm when a customer was rude or admitting fault instead of deflecting blame, gave her hope that she could rebuild not just her career, but also her sense of self-worth. Meanwhile, the entrepreneur continued transforming Skywings Airways from the inside out. The reforms she'd announced weren't just lip service. They were tangible changes designed to create a safer, more inclusive workplace. Sensitivity training sessions became mandatory for all employees, from pilots to ground staff. These weren't your typical corporate seminars where people half listened while checking their phones. Instead, they were interactive workshops, led by experts who encouraged open dialogue about bias, privilege, and empathy. One session stood out in particular. A group of flight attendants gathered in a conference room, hesitant at first but gradually opening up as the facilitator guided them through exercises. One attendant shared how she often felt overlooked because of her accent, while another admitted feeling pressured to tolerate disrespectful behavior from passengers just to avoid complaints. By the end of the session, the room buzzed with energy, not anger or frustration, but a shared commitment to do better. The entrepreneur didn't stop there. She introduced new policies aimed at empowering employees to speak up without fear of retaliation. An anonymous hotline allowed workers to report misconduct, and an independent review board ensured complaints were handled fairly. Additionally, she launched a campaign called Fly with Respect, which emphasized mutual respect between passengers and crew. Posters featuring the slogan appeared in terminals and onboard planes, reminding everyone that civility starts with each individual. These efforts didn't go unnoticed. Passengers began sharing positive feedback about their experiences with Skywings Airways. One traveler tweeted about a flight attendant who went above and beyond to help her calm a crying baby. Another wrote a heartfelt review praising the pilot for acknowledging the hard work of the cabin crew during a particularly turbulent flight. Even longtime critics of the airline admitted they noticed a shift in attitude, both among employees and within the company culture. But success came with challenges. Not everyone embraced the changes enthusiastically. Some veteran employees grumbled about the softening of standards, claiming the new initiatives made them feel like they were walking on eggshells. Others dismissed the reforms as performative, accusing the entrepreneur of using the incident as a PR stunt. While these criticisms stung, she refused to let them derail her mission. Change is rarely comfortable, she reminded herself, especially when it forces people to confront uncomfortable truths. Back in Rachel's corner of the world, life remained far from perfect. Finding stable employment proved difficult, even with glowing recommendations from her mentor. Many companies hesitated to hire someone with her history, fearing backlash from customers or negative press. Rejection after rejection chipped away at her confidence, but she refused to give up. She took odd jobs to make ends meet, working part-time at a coffee shop, cleaning offices late at night, anything to keep moving forward. Through it all, she stayed connected with her mentor, leaning on him for guidance during tough moments. Progress isn't linear, he reminded her whenever doubt crept in. You're not defined by the worst thing you've ever done. You're defined by what you choose to do next. Inspired by his words, Rachel decided to channel her experiences into something meaningful. She began volunteering at a local community center, teaching conflict resolution skills to teenagers. At first, she worried they wouldn't take her seriously. Who was she to teach anyone about handling emotions when she still struggled with her own? But to her surprise, the kids responded positively. They appreciated her honesty and related to her struggles, seeing her not as a failure but as proof that growth is possible. Word of her volunteer work eventually reached the entrepreneur. Through mutual contacts, she learned about Rachel's efforts to turn her life around. Impressed by her dedication, she reached out again, not to offer forgiveness but to commend Rachel for taking ownership of her actions. "What you're doing matters," she wrote in a brief email. "Keep going." Those simple words meant the world to Rachel. For so long, she'd carried the weight of her mistake alone, convinced she'd never earn back the trust she'd lost. Now, for the first time, she felt seen, not as the person who slapped a passenger on a plane, but as someone capable of change. As months turned into a year, both women continued growing in their respective journeys. The entrepreneur solidified her reputation as a leader who prioritized integrity over profit. Under her watch, Skywings Airways became known not just for its punctuality or comfort, but for its commitment to treating every person with dignity. Employees reported higher job satisfaction, and passenger loyalty soared. For Rachel, the road ahead remained uncertain, but she faced it with newfound resilience. She landed a position at a small charter service, where she excelled in creating a welcoming atmosphere for travelers. Her colleagues admired her ability to diffuse tense situations with grace and humor, a skill she'd honed during her time in the mentorship program. Though she occasionally stumbled, she always picked herself back up, determined to prove that second chances are worth fighting for. Neither woman forgot the events of that fateful flight. The slap, the scandal, the fallout. It had shaped them in profound ways. But rather than letting it define them, they used it as fuel for transformation. One chose to lead with accountability and compassion. The other chose to rebuild with humility and grit. Together, albeit indirectly, they proved that even the most painful moments can spark meaningful change, if we're brave enough to face them. The transformation within Skywings Airways was nothing short of remarkable. What had once been a struggling airline plagued by internal conflicts and customer complaints was now emerging as an industry leader in employee satisfaction and passenger experience. The entrepreneur's vision wasn't just about fixing problems. It was about creating something sustainable, something that would outlast her own tenure at the helm. She poured her heart into every decision, ensuring that the changes weren't superficial but deeply rooted in the values she believed mattered most: respect, accountability, and empathy. One of the most significant shifts came from empowering employees to take ownership of their roles. Instead of micromanaging or imposing rigid rules, she encouraged teams to collaborate and innovate. For example, cabin crew members were given more autonomy to handle passenger issues creatively, whether it meant surprising a nervous traveler with a comforting note or going the extra mile to accommodate special requests. This newfound freedom didn't just boost morale, it also improved service quality. Passengers noticed the difference, and word-of-mouth praise spread like wildfire. But perhaps the most impactful initiative was the anonymous hotline. At first, some employees were skeptical. Would their concerns really be taken seriously, or would they face subtle retaliation for speaking up? To address these fears, the entrepreneur made transparency a priority. Every reported issue was investigated thoroughly, and updates were shared regularly with staff. When someone flagged a manager for dismissive behavior toward junior employees, corrective action followed swiftly. Not behind closed doors, but openly, with clear communication about why the behavior was unacceptable. It sent a powerful message. No one was above accountability. Passenger feedback reflected this cultural shift. Social media lit up with stories of kindness and professionalism from Skywings Airways staff. One viral post featured a photo of a handwritten thank you card left on a passenger's seat after a long-haul flight. Another highlighted how a flight attendant helped reunite a lost child with their family during a layover. These moments may have seemed small individually, but together they painted a picture of an airline that cared, not because it was good for business, but because it was the right thing to do. For Rachel, life began to stabilize in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Her new job at the charter service suited her perfectly. Unlike larger airlines where bureaucracy often stifled creativity, this smaller operation valued flexibility and personal connections. Rachel thrived in this environment, finding joy in helping passengers feel welcome and comfortable. Whether it was cracking a joke to ease pre-flight nerves or offering a listening ear to someone having a rough day, she approached each interaction with genuine care. Still, old habits died hard. There were days when stress got the better of her, and she found herself slipping back into defensive patterns. Once, during a particularly chaotic boarding process, a passenger snapped at her over a seating mix-up. Instinctively, Rachel bristled, ready to fire back with a sharp retort. But then she paused, remembering everything she'd learned through therapy and mentorship. Taking a deep breath, she smiled politely and said, "I understand how frustrating this must be. Let me see what I can do to fix it." That moment, a tiny exchange between two strangers, felt monumental to Rachel. It was proof that she was changing, not just outwardly, but inwardly too. Each time she chose patience over anger, understanding over judgment, she felt a little lighter, as if shedding layers of shame and regret. Her volunteer work at the community center continued to play a crucial role in her healing journey. Teaching conflict resolution skills to teenagers gave her a renewed sense of purpose. Many of the kids reminded her of herself at that age, eager, yet insecure, quick to lash out when feeling cornered. By sharing her story, her failures, and her growth, she hoped to show them that mistakes don't define you unless you let them. One evening, after a particularly lively session with the teens, Rachel received a message from her mentor. He'd heard whispers of another airline looking to revamp its training programs and thought Rachel might be a perfect fit as a consultant. "You've come so far," he wrote. "Why not share your experience with others?" At first, Rachel hesitated. Consulting sounded intimidating, almost too big for someone like her. Who would trust her expertise after what she'd done? But the more she thought about it, the more excited she became. If she could help even one person avoid making the same mistakes she had, wouldn't it be worth it? She reached out to the airline tentatively, expecting rejection. To her surprise, they responded enthusiastically. They saw value in hiring someone who'd walked the difficult path of redemption, someone who could speak authentically about the importance of emotional regulation and workplace respect. Within weeks, Rachel found herself leading workshops for flight attendants and ground staff, sharing practical tools alongside candid reflections on her past. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just a year ago, she'd been the subject of ridicule, ostracized for her actions. Now she stood before rooms full of colleagues, earning their respect, not despite her history, but because of it. Her scars had become her strength, a testament to the power of resilience and self-awareness. Back at Skywings Airways, the entrepreneur kept pushing boundaries. She introduced wellness programs for employees, recognizing that mental health is just as important as physical safety. Meditation sessions, access to counseling services, and flexible scheduling options became standard offerings. Staff appreciation. Events celebrated milestones big and small, fostering a sense of community that extended beyond the workplace. Customers noticed the ripple effects. Flights felt less transactional and more human. Attendants greeted passengers warmly, using their names whenever possible. Pilots took time to acknowledge the hard work of the cabin crew over the intercom. Even gate agents went out of their way to make connections, chatting briefly with travelers while checking tickets. These small acts of kindness added up, turning routine journeys into memorable experiences. Of course, challenges persisted. Not every passenger behaved courteously, and not every employee embraced the new culture immediately. Change always meets resistance, especially in industries as fast-paced and high-stress as aviation. But the entrepreneur remained steadfast, reminding everyone involved, including herself, that progress isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. As months turned into years, both women continued to evolve. The entrepreneur expanded her influence beyond Skywings Airways, advocating for systemic reforms across the aviation industry. She spoke at conferences, wrote op-eds, and partnered with organizations dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion in workplaces. Her voice carried weight, not because of her title, but because of her authenticity. People listened because she spoke from the heart, drawing on her own experiences to inspire others. Rachel, meanwhile, carved out a niche for herself as a trainer and speaker. Her reputation grew steadily, built on a foundation of honesty and humility. She never shied away from discussing the incident that changed her life, viewing it not as a source of shame, but as a catalyst for growth. Audiences connected with her vulnerability, leaving her sessions inspired to confront their own flaws and strive for better. Though their paths rarely crossed directly, the bond between them remained unspoken, yet undeniable. They were connected by a shared commitment to creating a world where people treated each other with dignity, even in the face of adversity. Their journeys served as reminders that accountability and compassion aren't opposing forces. They're complementary, working hand in hand to drive meaningful change. And so, as planes soared through the skies and lives unfolded below, the legacy of that single slap continued to unfold. It wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was a story of redemption, resilience, and hope. A reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose what comes next. Years had passed since that unforgettable flight, and the ripple effects of that single moment continued to shape lives in ways no one could have predicted. The entrepreneur and Rachel were living proof that people can grow, learn, and transform, even when they start from very different places. Their stories weren't just about personal redemption or professional success. They were about the power of accountability, forgiveness, and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. For the entrepreneur, leading Skywings Airways became more than a business venture. It was her life's mission. She poured every ounce of energy into creating an airline that stood for something greater than profit margins. Her vision extended beyond customer satisfaction or operational efficiency. It was about building a culture where people felt valued, respected, and empowered to be their best selves. And slowly but surely, she succeeded. Skywings Airways wasn't perfect. No organization ever is. But it had become a beacon of hope within the aviation industry. Employees spoke proudly of working there, sharing stories of how the company supported them through tough times. One baggage handler talked about how his manager arranged flexible hours so he could care for his sick child. A pilot recounted how HR stepped in to mediate a conflict between crew members, turning what could have been a toxic situation into an opportunity for growth. These anecdotes weren't anomalies. They were part of the fabric of the airline now. Passengers noticed the wow difference too. Flying with Skywings Airways felt less like being shuffled through a system and more like being welcomed into a community. People began choosing the airline not because of flashy promotions or discounted fares, but because of its reputation for kindness and reliability. Social media buzzed with testimonials. The attendant noticed I looked tired and brought me a blanket without asking. I lost my wallet on board, and they went above and beyond to return it to me. These small acts of humanity added up, turning ordinary flights into extraordinary experiences. But perhaps the most profound impact of the entrepreneur's leadership was the way it inspired others in the industry to rethink their own practices. Competitors started paying attention, realizing that treating employees well didn't just boost morale, it translated into better service and happier customers. Conferences, once dominated by discussions of cost-cutting measures and revenue, targets began shifting focus toward topics like mental health support, diversity training, and workplace inclusivity. The entrepreneur found herself at the forefront of this movement, invited to speak at events around the world. Her message was simple, yet powerful. When you invest in people, everything else falls into place. Rachel's journey took a different path, but it was equally transformative. After years of hard work, she'd built a career she never thought possible. As a trainer and consultant, she traveled across the country, helping airlines and other organizations implement programs focused on emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. Her sessions were raw and honest, blending practical advice with deeply personal storytelling. She never sugarcoated her past mistakes. Instead, she leaned into them, using her experience as a teaching tool. "I'm not here to tell you I've got all the answers," she'd say at the start of each workshop. "I'm here because I messed up big time, and I learned some things along the way that might help you avoid doing the same." This vulnerability resonated with audiences, breaking down barriers and fostering genuine connections. Her reputation grew steadily, earning her recognition as a thought leader in workplace behavior. Industry publications featured her insights, and social media lit up with praise from attendees who called her workshops life-changing. Yet despite her growing fame, Rachel remained grounded. She knew she hadn't earned redemption overnight, and she refused to let success make her complacent. Every day she reminded herself of the lessons she'd learned: humility, patience, and the importance of owning your actions. One evening, after delivering a keynote speech at a major aviation conference, Rachel received a message from the entrepreneur. It was brief but heartfelt. "Proud of how far you've come, keep shining your light." Reading those words brought tears to her eyes. For so long she'd carried the weight of guilt, convinced she'd never earn back the respect she'd lost. Now, Hearing those words from the very person she'd wronged felt like closure, not just for what had happened on that flight, but for everything that followed. Their relationship, though still distant, had evolved into something meaningful. They weren't friends in the traditional sense, but they shared a bond forged through adversity and growth. Occasionally, they'd cross paths at industry events, exchanging polite nods or brief conversations. There was no bitterness, no lingering resentment, just mutual acknowledgement of the progress they'd both made. As time went on, the entrepreneur began reflecting on her own journey. Running Skywings Airways had been rewarding, but it had also been exhausting. She'd sacrificed countless weekends, missed family gatherings, and pushed herself to the brink of burnout more times than she cared to admit. Yet looking back, she wouldn't change a thing. The challenges had shaped her, teaching her resilience, and reminding her why she'd embarked on this path in the first place. Eventually, she decided it was time to step back. Not completely, of course. She still wanted to stay involved in shaping the future of aviation, but she needed space to breathe, to reconnect with the parts of herself that had gotten buried under years of relentless work. She handed over the reins to a trusted successor, confident that the foundation she'd built would endure long after she was gone. In her retirement speech, she addressed the entire company via video call. "When I bought this airline, I didn't know what I was getting into," she admitted with a wry smile. "All I knew was that I wanted to create something better, for passengers, for employees, and for the industry as a whole. Today I see that dream coming true thanks to all of you. You've shown me that change is possible even in the toughest circumstances." Her final words struck a chord. "Remember, none of us are perfect. We're going to stumble. We're going to fall short, and that's okay. What matters isn't where we start. It's where we choose to go next." Rachel watched the speech from her living room, tears streaming down her face. Those words echoed her own philosophy, a reminder that growth is a lifelong process. She thought back to that chaotic flight, the slap that changed everything, and marveled at how far she'd come since then. Back then she'd been angry, defensive, and blind to her own flaws. Now she was someone who inspired others to do better, a role she never imagined she'd play. Both women understood that scars don't disappear no matter how much healing takes place. But scars aren't always bad. They're reminders of battles fought and won, symbols of strength earned through struggle. For the entrepreneur, the sting of that slap served as motivation to build a kinder, fairer world. For Rachel, it was a constant nudge to stay humble and keep learning. And so their stories intertwined in unexpected ways, proving that even the darkest moments can lead to brighter futures, if we're willing to face them head on. The slap on that plane may have been shocking, painful, and public, but it sparked a chain reaction of change that touched countless lives. It showed that accountability isn't punishment. It's an invitation to grow. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to move forward. And redemption isn't erasing the past. It's building a better tomorrow. As planes soared through the skies, carrying passengers to destinations near and far, the legacy of that fateful flight lived on. It was a story of resilience, transformation, and hope, a testament to the idea that every ending holds the seed of a new beginning. And whether you're a passenger, an employee, or simply someone watching from the sidelines, the lesson remains the same: we all have the power to choose what comes next.